The girl's scream was silent. That was the cruelest part. 4 teenagers recording her tears, laughing at jokes she would never hear, pushing a body that couldn't fight back with sound. James froze in the restaurant doorway, his 10-year-old son Riley tugging at his sleeve, completely unaware of the violence unfolding 20 feet away. He had spent a decade running from moments like this, moments that reminded him he was still the man who knew how to break things. But watching her collapse, watching those phones capturing every humiliating second, something inside him snapped. James moved like instinct, like muscle memory from a life he'd buried. He grabbed the nearest phone, shattered it against the concrete, pushed the bullies back, pulled the girl to safety, her whole body shaking, her eyes begging him to understand something he couldn't hear. But as she stood there in his arms, trembling, desperately typing on her phone with shaking fingers, trying to tell him who she was, James realized the real crisis was only beginning. Because when he finally read those words on the screen, "I'm homeless," he made a choice that would change everything. A choice that said, "I will not let you face this alone." And in that moment, he didn't know that saving her would mean saving himself. The afternoon sun hung low over the parking lot, turning everything golden and soft. James pushed through the glass doors of Rosewood Diner, his hand loose around Riley's shoulder. They'd come for milkshakes, a Friday tradition since his wife died 6 years ago. It was their thing, just them. Riley chattered about school, about soccer tryouts next month, his voice bright in that way only 9-year-olds could manage. James listened, the way he always did, storing up these moments like they were water, and he was perpetually thirsty. He'd learned that lesson the hard way. Don't take a single second for granted. Don't assume there would be another Friday. That was when he heard it. Not a sound exactly, but the absence of one. A girl stood 50 feet away, backed against the brick wall of the adjacent building. 4 teenagers circled her, phones raised like weapons. Their mouths moved fast, animated, cruel. One of them jabbed a finger at her face. She flinched. Another pushed her shoulder, and she stumbled, her arms flailing out to catch herself. But what caught James's attention, what made his blood pressure spike, was her mouth. She was trying to say something. Her hands moved frantically through the air, and none of them understood. Or worse, they didn't care. James recognized the body language of a person screaming silently. He'd seen it before, in his old life, in the eyes of people he'd hurt before becoming someone worth knowing again. Riley didn't notice. He was too focused on his milkshake, chocolate smeared across his upper lip. James set his coffee down on the hood of their truck and stepped toward the girl without thinking. His body moved the way it used to move, fluid, purposeful, dangerous. The decade of therapy, the years of learning to breathe through his anger, the careful construction of a peaceful life, it all evaporated in the face of her silent scream. The nearest teenager saw him coming. His expression shifted from cruel amusement to something meaner. Something that included James in the joke now. "Problem, old man?" the kid said, not lowering his phone. He was recording. James realized this in the way a hunter recognizes a predator, with the part of his brain that still lived in the military. This wasn't random cruelty. This was performance, entertainment. The girl was content for their audience. "That phone," James said, his voice low and flat. "Put it down." The other 3 teenagers laughed. The girl's whole body tensed. She pressed herself harder against the wall, as if she could phase through the brick and disappear. Her eyes found James's, and he saw something there, a desperate hope mixed with the certainty that this would only get worse, that he would get tired of helping her, that everyone did eventually. James had spent 10 years trying to be the kind of man who didn't make decisions in the heat of the moment. 10 years of therapy, of learning that his impulses had once cost an innocent family everything. But in that moment, Standing between a terrified girl and 4 cameras, he made a choice that felt like stepping back in time. He moved fast, too fast, and grabbed the phone from the nearest teenager's hand. The kid yelped, reached out instinctively. James brought the phone down against the concrete parking lot in one sharp, final motion. The screen spiderwebbed. The impact echoed. "Don't," James said. "Record this girl again, and I'll do the same to all 4 of your phones. And then I'll explain to the police exactly why I did it." For a moment, there was perfect silence. The girl held her breath. Riley, watching from the truck 30 feet away, had gone very still. The teenagers looked at James, really looked at him, and saw something in the set of his shoulders, the flatness of his eyes, that convinced them he meant every word. One by one, they backed away, not running exactly, but retreating, making jokes to save face, looking back with the defiant anger of kids who knew they'd lost this round but didn't understand why. James turned to the girl. Up close, he could see she was younger than he'd thought. 18, maybe. Dirt smudged across one cheek, bruises blooming purple on her upper arm where they'd grabbed her. Her whole body trembled with adrenaline and shock. She opened her mouth, closed it, looked at his hands, at his face, at the smashed phone on the ground. Her lips moved. No sound came out. James understood then that this was her permanent condition. Not shock, not fear, silence, but actual, biological silence. She was deaf. He pulled out his phone, opened the Notes app and typed, "Are you okay?" When he turned the screen toward her, something in her expression cracked. Her eyes went wet. She reached out, and for a second, James thought she might hug him. Instead, she grabbed the phone from his hands and typed with shaking fingers, "Thank you, thank you, thank you." Riley appeared at James's side then, small and worried. "Dad? Dad, are you okay? Are you mad?" The boy looked at the girl, at the smashed phone, processing. Did you break their phone on purpose?" "I did," James said. "Sometimes you have to protect people." The girl read his lips, or at least tried to, and typed again. "I'm Piper. Where should I go?" "I can't." She trailed off, staring at the words on the screen as if they weren't making sense. James studied her, really studied her. The way her clothes hung a size too large. The fact that she had no bag, no jacket despite the cooling afternoon. The desperation in every line of her body. And he recognized something in that desperation, because he'd felt it himself once. That feeling of falling and knowing nobody was going to catch you. "Come inside for a minute," James typed. "You need water, and to sit down." Piper stared at the phone screen, then at James's face, searching for some sign of deception. Whatever she found there, whatever instinct made her trust a man she'd just met, she nodded. She followed James and Riley back into the diner, her hands still shaking, her grateful but terrified eyes never leaving his back. Rosewood Diner was nearly empty at 4 o'clock. The lunch crowd had cleared out, and dinner wouldn't start for another 2 hours. An elderly couple sat in one corner, reading newspapers across from each other. A solo diner at the counter nursed coffee. The waitress, Maggie, who'd known James for 5 years, didn't even look up from restocking the napkin holder. She'd learned not to ask questions about James. He was private. That was respected in places like this. James guided Piper to a booth in the back corner, away from the windows. Riley slid in next to her, while James took the opposite seat. The boy stared at Piper with the unself-conscious curiosity only children could manage. "Why can't you talk?" he asked. "Are you sick?" "Riley," James said gently. "She can hear and talk through her phone. Show some respect." But Piper was already typing. "I'm deaf, born deaf. I can talk with my voice. It just sounds different. And I read lips, but it's not perfect. Typing is easier." Riley nodded as if this made perfect sense. "I'm learning sign language at school," he said proudly. "We have a program. I know the alphabet and some words. Want to see?" Without waiting for an answer, the boy began moving his hands through simple finger-spelled letters, his tongue poking out in concentration. It was clumsy, halting, but when Piper's face lit up with genuine joy, the whole dynamic in the booth shifted. She began signing back to him, slow, exaggerated movements, so he could follow. And for the first time, James saw her smile. Maggie came over with water and menus. James ordered Piper a burger and fries without asking. She didn't object. When Maggie left, James opened his notes app again. "Where do you live?" Piper's fingers stilled on her coffee cup. She looked down at the water in front of her, at her own reflection probably, and typed, "Around." That's not an answer. She typed slowly, each word seeming to cost her. "I've been staying in different places. There's a park not far from here. It's okay." James felt something twist in his chest. He'd dealt with homeless communities as a SEAL, humanitarian efforts in regions devastated by conflict. He knew what different places meant. He knew what a park at night meant for a young woman alone. He took a breath, trying to keep his voice level when he typed. "For how long?" 5 months, Piper wrote. Since I left the group home. They said I aged out. Said I needed to find my own situation." She paused, then added, "I had a job washing dishes at a restaurant, but I missed too many days because of..." She gestured vaguely at her own body. "Because of stuff. They fired me." Riley had gone quiet, watching this exchange with the absorption of a child processing something important. He reached over and patted Piper's hand, awkwardly, the way he'd seen James do to comfort people. "My mom died," he said. "I was 4. It was really bad. But my dad says we get through bad things by being together." James felt his throat tighten. He reached over and squeezed Riley's shoulder, grateful for the boy's capacity to translate his grief into connection. Piper's eyes went glassy. She typed, "I'm sorry about your mom." "I'm sorry about your stuff," Riley replied, with the logic of children. The burger arrived. Piper ate like someone who wasn't sure when she'd eat again, and James didn't comment on it. He and Riley financed their milkshakes while she ate, and when she was done, James typed, "What's your full name?" "Piper Holloway. I'm 18. I don't have many options." She paused, then added, "Thank you for helping me today. But you don't have to do anything else. I'm used to figuring things out." No, you're not, James thought, and you shouldn't have to be. He looked at his son, who was watching Piper with the solemn concern of a child who understood tragedy. Then he typed, "You're coming to our house tonight. You need a safe place to sleep. After that, we'll figure out the rest." Piper stared at the phone screen. When she looked up at James, her eyes were fierce and uncertain and deeply, profoundly grateful all at once. She typed, "Why would you do that?" James thought about his own moment of falling, the time someone had caught him, the difference that one person's belief had made. He typed, "Because you deserve to be caught. And because I can." The house on Maple Street was modest, a 2-bedroom ranch with a small backyard where James had built a swing set 3 years ago. The grass needed mowing. There were toys scattered across the porch. It was the house of a man doing his best, which was exactly what it looked like. James helped Piper inside, showed her the guest bathroom, pulled clean towels from the hall closet. "There's anything you need," he said, typing as he spoke so she could read his lips and the words. "Fresh clothes in the drawer. We're about the same size as you, I think. My wife's..." He stopped. That wasn't quite true anymore. "Clothes she left behind. They're clean. They're yours if you want them." Piper's fingers trembled when she typed. "This is too much. I can't..." You can, James interrupted. And you will. I'm not interested in debate on this one. That night, dinner was simple. James made pasta. Riley set the table with great ceremony, explaining to Piper that he was the official table setter and took the job very seriously. Piper ate slowly, deliberately. James noticed she kept her eyes down, as if making eye contact might be too vulnerable, as if accepting kindness from a stranger might somehow trick her into believing things could be okay. After dinner, Riley showed Piper his room, a sprawling landscape of books and Legos and half-finished drawings. The boy was in that sweet phase where his imagination still ran wild, before the world taught him to be cynical. You can sleep in the guest room, he told Piper, but you can hang out in here during the day if you want. I have books about art, and I'm teaching myself sign language so I can talk better. Piper signed something back to him, her hands moving with clear affection, and Riley grinned like she'd just given him $1 million. Later, after Riley was asleep, James and Piper sat in the living room. He typed, "Tell me about your family. Where are they?" She took a long time typing. "My parents died when I was 14. Car accident. They were good people, but they never learned sign language. They never wanted me to hang out with other deaf people. They wanted me to be normal. When they died, I went to the group home. And when I aged out," she trailed off. "You had nobody," James finished. "I have nobody," she confirmed. James thought about the 10 years he'd spent trying to rebuild himself after his wife died. He thought about the isolation of grief, the way it could hollow you out from the inside. He typed, "You have Riley and me now, for as long as you need." Piper looked away. Her shoulders curved inward, making herself small. "You barely know me." "I know you're worth saving," James typed. "That's enough." She cried then, not the desperate, silent tears she'd shed earlier, but deep, body-racking sobs. She didn't make a sound, which somehow made it worse. James didn't think. He moved to the other end of the couch and pulled her against his chest. Riley had taught him that sometimes people just needed to be held. Piper cried into his shirt, and he rested his chin on her head and let her feel that she wasn't alone anymore. The next morning, James woke up thinking about logistics. Piper needed documents, a job, a plan. He was making coffee, already spinning through contacts and possibilities in his mind, when Riley came down, dragging Piper by the hand. "Dad, can Piper stay?" Stay. Stay." James typed to Piper, "What do you think?" She typed back, "I can't keep taking from you." "You're not taking," James typed. "You're letting me give. That's different." He looked at his son, at the hope written across the boy's face. "Besides, Riley needs a sister. He's been an only child for too long." That's when the first real conflict emerged. Over breakfast, James's sister called. Carol had always been in his business, well-meaning, protective, but controlling. "James, I'm coming by today with some work I need help with," she said. "It's the Hendricks account, remember? We need the spreadsheets by Monday." James had completely forgotten. Before Piper, before yesterday, he'd agreed to help Carol with her consulting business. He'd made a commitment, and now he had a traumatized teenager sleeping in his guest room, and his carefully ordered life was becoming complicated. "Actually, not today," he told Carol. "Something's come up." "What could possibly have come up?" Carol demanded. "This is a $1,000 project, James. You committed." He looked at Piper, who was helping Riley set out cereal and milk. She was trying to be helpful, trying to be small and undemanding, trying to prove she was worth the space she was taking up. "I'll explain later," James said. "Just not today." That afternoon, he took Piper to run errands. They went to a thrift store and got her some clothes that actually fit. They went to the grocery store, and James watched her stand frozen in front of the shelves, overwhelmed by choice. She'd been surviving on convenience store food, on whatever she could steal or scavenge. Having a whole store dedicated to feeding yourself seemed to break something open in her. They bought ingredients for dinner, real dinner, the kind that required multiple steps and fresh vegetables. That night, after Riley was asleep, James and Piper sat in the kitchen. He typed, "I need to ask you something important. Are you in contact with anyone from the system? The group home? Is there anyone looking for you?" She shook her head. Typed, "I told them I was leaving. I'm 18. They legally didn't have to care." "Okay," James typed. "Because if we're doing this, and I mean really doing this, you need to be safe. You need to understand that there are people who are going to ask questions." "People like who?" Piper typed. "People like my sister," James said aloud, then typed it so she could read his lips. "And eventually, people like social workers. If I'm taking you in permanently, we need to do this the right way." Over the next 2 weeks, James set up the machinery of permanence. He worked with a lawyer he knew. They filed paperwork, making him Piper's legal guardian. It was harder than it should have been, because Piper kept expecting him to change his mind, kept bracing for rejection. One night, James found her packing her few belongings into a backpack. When he asked why, she typed, "So I can leave fast when you decide I'm too much." James sat down, pulled out his phone, and typed, "I've spent the last 10 years rebuilding my life after my wife died. Do you know what I learned? That the people you love, really love, are the ones worth the complications. And yeah, this is complicated. And yeah, you're going to be frustrating sometimes. But you're not going anywhere." She unpacked her backpack. During the 3rd week, Carol came to the house, and James had to introduce her to Piper. Carol's face went through several expressions: surprise, concern, assessment. "James," she said, pulling him aside. "What are you doing?" "Being human," he replied. "She needed help. I could help. I'm helping." "You don't even know her. She could be anyone. She could be taking advantage of you." James looked back into the living room, where Piper was teaching Riley sign language for pizza and dog and "I love you," where his son was laughing, genuinely laughing, in a way he hadn't in months. She could be, he agreed, but she's not. Carol didn't stay long, but she called their mother, who called James, concerned about his judgment. The whole family worried he was having some kind of breakdown, some kind of delayed grief response. He wasn't. He was finally doing something that made sense. The crisis came on a Sunday, 4 weeks after Piper arrived. James was at the grocery store. Riley was at soccer practice. Piper was alone in the house when she heard the knocking. Not soft, aggressive. Multiple fists on the front door, on the windows. She looked out and saw them. 2 men in suits, official looking. She didn't answer the door. She texted James, "There are people here. I'm scared." James's blood ran cold. He left the grocery cart in the middle of the aisle and drove home faster than was safe. When he pulled up, the men were still there, now looking annoyed, holding clipboards. Social workers. They had a report of an 18-year-old deaf female residing in the home without proper documentation. Could they speak to her? Could they verify the living situation? James parked and walked toward them, his body language projecting authority. "I'm James Hartley. She lives here legally. I'm her guardian." He produced the documents they'd filed weeks ago. The social workers looked unimpressed. "We have reports that she's been homeless," one of them said, "that you took her from the street. We need to verify that she's in a safe, appropriate living situation." "She is," James said flatly. "She's in school. She has documentation. She has—" "We'd still like to speak with her," the second worker interrupted. "Alone." Piper watched from the window, and something inside James crystallized. He thought about his own mother, how she'd tried to save him after the seal incident, how the system had labeled him a danger to himself and others. He thought about the bureaucratic machinery of protection, that often ended up destroying the very people it tried to help. He thought about Piper, who'd already lost everything, being put through interrogation by strangers. "No," he said. "You won't speak to her alone. You won't speak to her at all without a lawyer present. And unless you have a warrant, you need to leave my property." Mr. Bond. "Hartley, get off my property," James repeated. His voice had changed. It had that old quality, the one that came from a life he'd left behind. The social workers exchanged glances. They took his documentation, said they'd be in touch, and left. Inside, Piper was shaking. James typed, "They're gone. You're safe." "Are they coming back?" she typed. "Maybe," James said honestly. "But I'm not going to let them take you from this house unless you want to leave. You understand? Not without a legal fight." That night, Riley asked what was happening. James explained in child-friendly terms that sometimes people in charge make rules that don't always make sense. "Sometimes," he said, "you have to fight for the people you love. And that's okay. That's the right thing to do." Riley nodded seriously. He asked Piper if she was okay. She signed something back to him, and he hugged her, fierce and protective in the way of children who understood that love meant protecting your people. The following week, James met with a lawyer. The documentation was solid. Piper was officially his ward. But there was a darker issue beneath the surface. The social worker's report mentioned that they'd received an anonymous tip. Someone had called to report a concerning living situation. Someone who knew about Piper. Someone in their circle. James knew it was Carol. He called his sister. "What did you do?" he asked quietly. "I reported a potentially dangerous situation," Carol said. "James, you don't know this girl. She could have a criminal history. She could be a threat to Riley." "She's deaf and homeless and 18 years old," James said. "She's not a threat. She's a kid who needed help. And now the state is investigating your home. Our family name is being looked at. You're putting your custody of Riley at risk." "No," James said. "You did that when you picked up the phone." He hung up. He didn't call her back. Carol didn't call him again. The real crisis came a week later. The school called. Riley had gotten into a fight. Another kid had pushed him down on the playground, told him his deaf friend was weird, and that his dad was crazy. Riley had swung at the kid without thinking. James had to pick him up from the principal's office, had to sit through a lecture about violence not being the solution to conflict. That night, Riley cried in his room. James sat with him, and the boy asked the question James had been dreading. "Are we a normal family?" "No," James said. "We're not." Is that bad?" James thought about normal. He thought about the house on Maple Street, the swing set, the homework battles and sports practice. He thought about the night Piper had first sat at their dinner table. He thought about the way Riley's face lit up when he successfully signed an entire sentence. He thought about the silence that Piper carried, and how they'd all learned a new language to meet her there. "No," he said. "It's not bad. It's better than normal. Normal is easy. What we have is harder. But it's real. You understand? It's real love, not the easy kind. And real things are worth fighting for." He brought Riley downstairs, where Piper was reading a book. The boy signed something to her, slowly, carefully, and she signed back and pulled him into a hug. James watched his son and this girl he'd saved, or maybe the girl who'd saved him, and felt something like peace settle into his bones. The state's investigation concluded that everything was appropriate. Piper was receiving food, shelter, education. James had stable employment, a clean home, legal guardianship. There were no safeguarding concerns. The case was closed. 2 months after Piper arrived, the house on Maple Street had transformed into something almost unrecognizable. Not in its physical structure. It was still the same modest ranch, but in how it felt. There was laughter now. Real, unself-conscious laughter. There were 3 place settings at the dinner table every night. There were books about deaf culture stacked on the living room shelf. There was sign language being spoken in the kitchen, halting and imperfect, but genuine. James had stopped trying to fix Piper. He'd learned, through reading and therapy and simply being present with her, that she didn't need fixing. She needed witnessing. She needed someone to see her, fully, completely, and choose to stay anyway. One evening, as they were making dinner, James typed on his phone while Piper read his lips. "How are you feeling?" "Really?" Piper took her time responding. She was learning to type less and sign more, her hands becoming more confident every day. But for complex emotions, she still reached for text. She typed, "Safe. For the first time in 5 months, I feel safe. But sometimes I'm scared that this is temporary. That you'll wake up one day and realize what a burden I am." James set down his phone and signed to her, slowly, deliberately. "You are home, not burden." She cried, but it was different than before. It was the kind of crying that came from releasing pressure, not from accumulating it. Riley had taken to sleeping with his sign language book beside his bed. He was fluent in the basics now, could have simple conversations with Piper without James as an intermediary. One afternoon, James found them in the backyard, Riley teaching Piper how to play soccer. She moved awkwardly at first. 4 years of malnutrition and stress had left her weak, but Riley was patient. He showed her how to position her feet. He didn't talk to her while she was focusing, understanding instinctively that she needed to watch his body, not listen to his voice. That patience, that instinctive understanding of her needs, broke something open in James. He realized his son was becoming the kind of person who saw people. Really saw them. The kind of person who understood that communication took many forms, that love wasn't about being heard, but about being understood. At school, things improved for Piper too. She started attending community college, online courses at first, classes where she could use subtitles and accommodations. She got a job at a local coffee shop that was owned by a deaf woman who understood her completely and treated her like an equal. For the first time in her life, Piper existed in spaces designed to include her, not spaces where she had to be the one doing all the adjusting. James watched from the periphery, giving her space to build her own life while keeping the foundation solid. He went back to work full-time at a security firm, doing consulting work. He wasn't a Navy SEAL anymore, hadn't been for a decade. But he was something steadier now. He was a father. He was a guardian. He was a man who kept his promises. One night, Piper came to him and typed, "Thank you for not letting me disappear." James typed back, "Thank you for letting me be the kind of man who saves people." She understood then, not just from his words, but from the weight they carried, that he wasn't a savior, and she wasn't a victim. They were 2 broken people who had found ways to heal each other. She was healing him as much as he was healing her. 6 months after Piper moved in, James, Riley, and Piper sat in Rosewood Diner, the same booth in the back, the same waitress, Maggie, who now knew Piper's order by heart. It was a Friday afternoon. Their weekly ritual expanded now to include 3 instead of 2. Piper had changed in ways both visible and invisible. Her body was fuller, healthier. The desperation had leached out of her eyes, replaced by something gentler. Hope, maybe. Or just the confidence that comes from knowing you have a place in the world. She was wearing clothes that fit, that she'd chosen herself. Her hair was longer, and she was growing it out on purpose. A small act of claiming her own aesthetic, building her own identity piece by piece. Riley was growing too. He'd gotten taller, more serious in the way of children who'd learned that the world contained real pain. But he'd also become kinder, more empathetic. He was tutoring other students in sign language at school. He wanted to study deaf culture in college, he'd told James last month. He thought maybe he wanted to work as an interpreter or become a teacher. He wanted to build bridges between the world his sister lived in and the world that had previously had no place for her. "What are you thinking about?" James asked Piper, though his question was both spoken and typed, a habit they'd all developed. Piper took a moment to respond, her fingers moving across her phone screen. "I'm thinking about how different my life looks now. 6 months ago, I was sleeping in a park. Now I'm in college, working at a job I love, part of—" She paused, as if the word was too big, too significant. "Part of a family." Riley reached over and squeezed her hand. "We're definitely a family," he said simply. "Right, Dad?" James looked at his son, at this girl who wasn't technically his daughter, but who had become essential to him anyway, at the simple, ordinary miracle of sitting in a diner on a Friday afternoon with people he loved. "Yeah," he said, "definitely a family." Piper's eyes went wet, but she was smiling. She signed something, a complex sentence that James was still learning to read, and Riley laughed and signed back to her. They had conversations now that didn't involve James, that existed in their own space. It was one of the greatest gifts of his life. Later, back at home, James found himself thinking about the woman his wife had been. Diana had been kind, but she'd also been fragile. Her death, sudden, violent, a brain aneurysm that had taken her while she was putting the groceries away, had left a hole in his life that he'd spent a decade trying to fill with therapy and work, and the intense, singular focus on keeping Riley alive and okay. He'd never expected that hole to be filled by a scared girl he'd saved in a parking lot. But maybe that was the thing about healing. You couldn't dictate the form it took. You could only be open enough to receive it when it arrived. That night, James sat on the back porch and thought about the man he'd been, the Navy SEAL who broke things, the grieving widower who'd withdrawn from the world, the single father trying to construct normalcy out of tragedy, and now a man who'd chosen to expand his family, to complicate his life intentionally, to say yes to a stranger who needed him. He wasn't fixed. None of them were. But they were healing, together, in this modest little house on Maple Street. They were learning that family wasn't just about biology or legality. It was about presence. It was about choosing each other, every single day. Even when it was hard. It was about seeing someone in their deepest pain and not looking away. Piper appeared in the doorway, already in pajamas. She'd learned over the past months that James often sat outside in the evenings. She didn't ask why, just sat down next to him. They sat in silence for a long time, the comfortable silence of people who didn't need words to understand each other. Finally, Piper typed something on her phone and turned the screen toward him. "I used to believe that being deaf meant being invisible, that I'd never be part of anything that mattered. You and Riley showed me that I was wrong. Thank you for seeing me when I was screaming in silence." James read it twice, 3 times. He pulled her close and kissed the top of her head. "Thank you for letting me be the man who saw you," he said. And in that moment, on the back porch of a modest house on Maple Street, 2 people who'd both been broken in different ways understood that they'd both been saved. Not by each other, but by the simple, profound act of presence, of showing up, of choosing love when every rational instinct said to walk away. Riley came outside then, half asleep, and crawled into James's lap the way he did when he was tired. Piper rested her head on James's shoulder, and the 3 of them sat together under the stars, a family formed by choice rather than accident, stronger for every break they'd endured, whole in ways that had nothing to do with being perfect. This was what healing looked like, not erasing the past, but building something new on top of it, something real, something worth every complication, something worth fighting for.